Good morning or good afternoon, and welcome to today's program and webinar, part of the highly acclaimed series of webinars that ACP, the Association of Contingency Planners, presents for both current and future members. For more information about ACP, please visit www.acp-international.com. My name is Ed Goldberg, and it's my honor to host these webinars. My thanks to Gianna and Alyssa at ACP's headquarters at ADG in Albany, and my good friend Fred Rogers at Continuity Housing for their roles as webinar experts who work behind the scenes to ensure that these webinars happen flawlessly. And a big thanks to our webinar series sponsor, Continuity Housing. Continuity Housing guarantees pre-negotiated hotel rooms at substantial savings for the critical employees of larger and mid-sized companies in order to help prevent a business disruption in the event of a crisis. They've created a patent-pending guaranteed employee housing program which secures and protects hotel rooms for critical personnel and their families if needed, while saving companies significant expense. Continuity Housing has a 100% success record with their deployments, and each member of their team has at least 10 years of experience. For information on receiving a free 30-minute consultation about your deployment housing needs, visit continuityhousing.com or leave a comment in the survey that pops up at the end of the webinar. This and previous webinars are recorded and made available on the ACP website. Please feel free to share the link to the recordings with your peers and anyone you think might benefit from it. You'll receive a link to the recording after the webinar via email along with additional information on the topical content. Help us out if you would. If you have an idea for a webinar topic, please send it to fred.rogers@continuityhousing.com. Our topic today is Bioterrorism Preparedness for Businesses, how to stay operational even during an anthrax attack. Since 1999, the nation has stockpiled life-saving medications to be quickly distributed to local health departments in the event of a bioterrorism disaster. In the last few years, there's been a concentrated effort by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to encourage local public health departments to partner with large employers in the community to distribute that medication directly to their employees and their families during a bioterrorism event such as a regional anthrax attack. Many employers across the country are already part of the program, which is called a closed point of dispensing network or closed POD network. But many are not even aware of the program's existence. Becoming a closed pod directly benefits an employer by assuring its workers are protected against a lethal biological agent, and also helps achieve a company's business continuity goals by encouraging workers to report for duty and keep the company operating. This presentation will explain the benefits of the program and show both public and private employers how they can better protect their workers and remain operational in the wake of a bioterrorism attack. Our speaker today is Harlan Dolgen. Harlan Dolgen has been a business continuity professional for more than 15 years, having received his CBCP in 2003. He's a co-owner of Biodefense Network, a public health consultancy that specializes in all aspects of closed POD planning, including recruiting businesses and other organizations to become closed points of dispensing. He is also co-founder of pandemicprep.org, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides free educational sessions on pandemic and bioterrorism preparedness in the St. Louis region. Harlan has been a business continuity consultant since 2009, previously worked for Thomson Reuters, WellPoint, and U.S. Bank in business continuity and disaster recovery management positions. Please join me in welcoming Harlan Dolgen. Good morning or good afternoon, Harlan.
Well, thank you very much, Fred, and appreciate being here talking with everyone. And now that Fred's given my presentation, I think I'll just take questions. Anyone have any questions? No, I'm kidding. Okay. Fred had gone over my bio a little bit, so I'm not really going to focus on that. I've gone the path many of you have been in business continuity with different companies over the last 15 years. And just in the last, really since 2006, I've been focusing on pandemic preparedness. And then since 2011 specifically, focusing exclusively on bioterrorism preparedness. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And I have a course that I teach for St. Louis University's Institute of Biosecurity that deals with pandemic planning, bioterrorism planning, as well as general business continuity planning, what people need to know for that. And the last thing is I've been a member at large of ACP since last year, and so I'm enjoying that as well. So first of all, we're going to talk about a public health emergency, and this is something that most of you don't think about. You may have thought about pandemics, but this is a little broader than just pandemics. We're talking about something like if there was anthrax released in the community, or tularemia or plague, and those are a different color. Those are red because the program that I'm going to be talking about focuses directly on how we would prepare for those types of releases. But there's also smallpox, pandemic diseases, and Ebola, and the program that I'll talk about generally can impact those items, but the program that I'm talking about for companies is really just anthrax, tularemia, and plague. So you heard Fred use the term closed pod or closed point of dispensing, and so what we're talking about is partnering with local public health to receive a predetermined amount of medicine. The medication is free from the health department, so you're allowed to protect your organization, all your employees, all your members, students, volunteers, basically anybody that you designate. It's entirely up to you, along with all of their family members as well. And there's an assumption that there's 3 family members for every covered person, whether it's an employee or a contractor or whomever. So a total of 4, if you include the employee plus 3 family members, it's 4 people covered for each employee or other person that's covered in your organization. So with this program, you're allowed to distribute medication free to your people, and that's, it's in the form of antibiotics for this program. So it's ciprofloxacin or doxycycline, and those are the 2 antibiotics that are going to be made available to you for you to actually hand out to your people. And you probably have lots of questions about how can you legally distribute medicine and all that, and we'll cover all of that in this presentation. So public health emergency preparedness, what we're talking about is there's an actual group in every county across the entire country that does public health emergency preparedness. It's also called PHEP, P-H-E-P, and they are responsible for all of the things like pandemic and Ebola. Certainly that's become a big threat in the last year or so. And so there's emergency management and there's public health. So emergency management in every community deals with tornadoes, hurricanes, wildfires, those types of disasters, and that flooding would be included in that. And then public health people deal with public health issues like anthrax, pandemic, Ebola, those kinds of things. So PHEP funding is through federal and state organizations that provide every county with the ability to hire people and then purchase equipment that help with public health preparedness. What we're talking about in this program specifically is an aerosolized anthrax release. It's interesting, if anybody watches NCSI Los Angeles, they just had this exact scenario play out Monday night's episode. So if you want to, you might want to look that up. But it's exactly what we're talking about here. Of course, they stopped the threat and saved the day before anything was released. But who knows if that would ever be the case. Anyway, what the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, is recommending is that every community be prepared to dispense what they call medical countermeasures, that's these antibiotics we're talking about, within 48 hours to all residents within their boundaries. And that's true whether they live there or whether they're visiting. So tourist locations like Las Vegas and LA have to be prepared to do more than just their residents. So you want to make sure that the community is prepared to do that. And so so one of the things I wanted to share with you is just some threats that have happened in the past. We're talking about anthrax incidents. In 1979, there was a little town in Russia, and you can see the town if you can follow my mouse or my cursor. The town was up to the north, and there was a factory worker that was supposed to replace a filter, and the filter was removed, and then his shift ended, so he left a note for the people at the next shift to replace the filter. Obviously, they didn't see the note. The filter wasn't replaced immediately, and as a result of that, anthrax spores got into the air, and you can see the wind carried the anthrax spores, and 68 people died along the lines that is on the map there. And so that's something that we know that there is weaponized anthrax out there. It's in laboratories in the United States as well. In 2001, one of those laboratories was, we believe, was compromised, and some anthrax was sent through the mail to various political figures. And so we know this is something that there's the potential for it to happen. We hope it never does. We pray it never does. But in the meantime, we should all be prepared in case it does. In 2014, there was the ricin incident in Georgetown University where someone in a dorm was actually manufacturing ricin, obviously for no good purpose at all. This is something, this quote is something that I've used to make sure that people realize how important it is to prepare at the local community level. It's not something that the feds are going to be able to come in and save everybody on. If you're not prepared at the local level, the results will be very, very bad. And so we all want to make sure that we are prepared. So there's something called the Strategic National Stockpile, or SNS. And that is a series of warehouses all around the country that would warehouse these antibiotics. And in fact, on the next page, we talk about all the different things that the content. So it warehouses a lot of different materials that would be used during a public health emergency, so that every community doesn't have to be prepared and buy their own contents. So this is something, one of the things, I'll move back a slide, is down at the bottom. It talks about a 12-hour pushback. This is something where the government guarantees that they will get any community that is suffering a disaster for public health, they will get them medicine and supplies within 12 hours. And the types of supplies are these here. So I'm not going to go over the list, but you can see it's a lot of different types of things that would help us during a lot of different types of scenarios. And these SNS packs, these warehouses, are stored all around the country, so they guarantee that within 12 hours they can get it to you. And they have contracts with UPS and FedEx in different locations to make sure to guarantee that they can get it to you very timely, whatever community is going through this type of disaster. Okay, the way someone would request SNS materials, now keep in mind this is all done at the government level, but they would have to determine, first of all, that the needs for the medicine outweigh what the local supplies that they have, and then they request assistance from the state. The state then requests assistance from the federal authorities. The federal authorities would then grant, and it's actually the Secretary of Health and Human Services who would declare that SNS assets need to be moved to a particular location, and then the SNS assets come to your locality and they would be distributed accordingly. And then there would also be a lot of discussions between all of the federal agencies, because obviously this is a very serious time, and you know, whether it's anthrax or something else, but obviously there would be lots of communications with federal, state, and local level agencies. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what a pod is. A pod is a point of dispensing. It's not a P-pod. So a point of dispensing is a way for people to distribute medications and anything else that's needed as quickly as possible in a local community. So there are open points of dispensing, open pods, and those are open to the public. And then there would be closed pods or closed points of dispensing, and those would be run by companies or other large organizations, universities, hospitals, school districts, those organizations that have a predefined, preset number of people, and they can deliver to those people. And what that does, when we have open pods, the open pods, you can see there will be very long lines at the open pods here. So what we're talking about is these three buildings here, pod A, B, and C. You've got the health department giving medication to all of these pods, and you've got long lines here, and you've got your company. Your company has no option but to have people stand in these long lines. And just as an example, in St. Louis County specifically, each local open pod is going to service about 50,000 people. So the way my partner always tells it, where would you want your people to be in the event that there's an anthrax release or something like that in the community? Would you want them to be cowering at home with their families? Would you like them to be at open pods with 50,000 of their closest friends? Different for every community, but you get the idea. Or would you like to be able to say, come to work? So at present, with open pods, your company would wind up being closed, and you would have to send them to these open pods. The other alternative is for you to be able to be that body, that company that says, come to work, we've got your medications, we've thought about this, and it's just going to be another sort of day, normal day at the office. So here there's one less pod, so we removed a pod. The medicine makes an end around the pods and comes directly to your facility, and you're able to say, come in, we're open. So we feel this is a much better solution. It reduces, and you can also see there's fewer lines. So there's fewer people in lines at the pods, and there's fewer people in lines or shorter lines at your company. And this is just a way for us to deal with a situation that we hope never happens, but if it happens, we're all prepared, and you're able to pretty much be open, and it's business as usual. So just to tell you what we've done, my company is Biodefense Network. We don't, just so you know, there's a disclaimer, we don't charge any companies to do this process. Our fees come from the counties, and so we're working in a number of places to help with public health awareness, with actual creating more closed pods for communities. So you can see we've worked in New York, in Missouri, which is where I'm from. In Texas, we have a lot of jobs in Texas. I'm in Houston now, in California, and we're starting a job next month in Seattle, Washington. And our goal is for these communities to get more closed pods, so you reaching out to them, and by the way, every community around the country is doing this, so you reaching out to your local community is certainly going to help you and going to help them and help the community. So let's talk about what we did specifically in St. Louis. So there's a representation of the arch. Before we got involved in 2011 with St. Louis County, they had already had 27% of their people in closed pods, and that's 27% of all the residents. St. Louis County has 1 million residents, so it makes the math really easy. And so they had 270,000 people in closed pods, and we had a goal when we did the project for them of reaching 34%, so that would be another 70,000 people in closed pods by recruiting the largest companies to become closed pods. And we asked them for a stretch goal. We said, what would you like to see? And they said 50%. If we could get 50% of all the residents being part of closed points of dispensing, then they felt they could handle 50% being in open pods and open points of dispensing. And as it turns out, we were actually able within a 5-month period to get 15 of the 19 largest companies or largest employers in St. Louis County as part of a closed pod, which means that 72% or 7 out of every 10 people would actually go to work to get their life-saving medications during an anthrax release, which we call St. Louis the most prepared county in the country to deal with a bioterrorism event, because nobody else has reached 72% of their community being serviced by closed pods. So the impact on St. Louis's preparedness was substantial. So before our project, when they only had 27% of their residents covered by closed pods, they knew that they had to open 15 to 20 open pods, and each pod requires 100 people to run it, because again, we're talking about 50,000 people going through this pod. So 100 people would run an open pod. And we would need 2 shifts, so that was 200 people. And if you multiply that by 15 open pods, you get about 3,000 people. So that's where you get 3,000 to 4,000 people or volunteers, and staff is included with that. But it's mostly volunteers who would have to help with this. After the project, you can see on the right, they determined that with 72% of the population covered, only 7 to 8 open pods were needed. And that the total number of volunteers that they would need is 1,400 to 1,600. So we really had a significant impact on their ability to handle some kind of anthrax release or something else like that. Okay. So what are the benefits of participation from your end? So if you're a company, you want to make sure that you can get life-saving medication, what we call life-saving medication, when you need it most. So if there is some kind of a release in your area, you want to be in control of how fast you're distributing it to your people and the fact that your people are even getting the medication. There's no cost to this program at all. There's no cost to sign up, and even the medication is free. You want to protect your most important asset, which is your workforce, your contractors and other groups that you can decide, as well as their families. You're able to remain open much longer during an emergency, which is a good thing. You also give your employees peace of mind that no one had probably ever thought of a bioterrorism incident before, but you can let them know you've got them covered. And of course, it's part of your business continuity or your coup plan, so that it's just another quiver, another arrow in your quiver that you can pull out, another tool you can use to make sure that your company remains safe and that all your employees remain safe. So I've talked about this a little bit before, but the biggest question, or the most frequent question we get, how much does this cost? And the fact is, I've said it before, there's no cost to enroll for companies or organizations, and there's no cost even for the medications. The medications are already pre-positioned and they're paid for by the federal government under this SNS program, so you don't have to worry about that. The next question that comes up is, what's my liability? And there actually is no liability for this program, and there's one exception that I'll talk about in a little bit. So there's something called the PREP Act of 2005. And what that is the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act. It's a liability shield that the federal government has passed through legislation that says that if you're trying to be a good Samaritan and you're participating in this program, that you're not going to be sued in court from any kind of tort liability. And the only exception for that is willful misconduct, which I think you could understand. So if somebody intentionally does something, that's not covered, but as long as you're basically following the program, you are covered from liability. Okay? So when we talk about the PREP Act, there's just a couple of slides on the PREP Act. So it covers a lot of different people. All of you on the webinar and all of the people in the state would be considered program planners. So a program planner is defined as the state agency, the state or local government, employees, agencies, and then other persons. It has this other persons category, which includes private sector, employer, or community groups. And so, and it's the community groups and the private employers that if they supervise or administer a program, to administer, dispense, distribute, provide, or use a countermeasure. So it's pretty broad language. And again, these are called countermeasures. All of these, this is a bioterrorism countermeasure. And it says anyone who is participating in this program, including even providing a facility, all of that is covered and you're shielded from liability. And you do have to follow your local regulations, and I'll get to that in a little minute. So how someone would participate. So first of all, there's materials that we can make available if anyone wants to contact me, and there's information about my contact. There's my contact information on the last screen that you'll see in a few minutes. But I'm happy to provide you materials that we have. You also want to contact your local health department and see what materials they have. Specifically, you want to ask for the emergency preparedness manager. Every community pretty much should have one of those. If not emergency preparedness, you might want to ask for emergency management. But they'll definitely know about the closed pod program. This is something that the CDC is pushing, so every community knows about this. And you want to ask about the local requirements of the program, and I'll talk about some of the differences we've found around the country with regard to that. And you also probably want to assemble a work group, and many of you probably have business continuity work groups. Some might have pandemic planning work groups. Those are the types of work groups that would be just one more thing for that work group to do. So I talked about local variation. So every community is different on how they implement this program. So they'll have size differences. So St. Louis County has 75 people as the minimum. I would say most communities have 100 people, 100 employees as the minimum, unless you're in a very small community, and then in which case it might be smaller. An example, Dallas has a minimum of 1,000 employees. Houston has a minimum of 2,500 employees, although they're looking at reducing that number. But so every community is going to have its own different rules, so you have to figure out what those rules are. So dispensing laws, who can dispense? I talked about the fact that you're going to be dispensing medication. It's only a pill bottle, so literally you're going to be handing pill bottles over. You want to keep in mind that states like Texas, California say anybody can dispense. New York is another one that says anybody can dispense. States like Florida and Utah have rules that say even during a public health emergency, you have to have a license to dispense. And then there are other states that are somewhere in between. So Missouri, for example, you either have to have a license to dispense medicine, or you can receive a 3.5 or 4-hour training course, and then you go on a list, and then you're allowed to dispense medicine as long as you've had that training, and the state of Missouri knows you've had that training. So it's just varies by state. You need to find out what the local state requirements are. The next question is whether there's an issue of are they going to deliver the medicine to you, or are you going to have to pick it up? So that's a small detail, but it's just something that varies state by state and community by community. Whether there are any Good Samaritan laws, I focus on the PrEP Act because that's a general liability shield for every community. There may also be some additional Good Samaritan laws that apply to your community. And then the dependent, what we call the multiplier. So I've said that most communities, almost all communities, use a dependent multiplier of 3 family members for every, or 3 dependents for every employee or consultant or contractor or whatnot. You just need to find out what that dependent multiplier is. And then there's a memorandum of understanding, or an MOU, that they'll ask you to sign. Sometimes it's a memorandum of agreement, MOA. So you just need to find out the language that they want you to agree to. And then if you're a national employer, we're trying to institute a program where national employers don't have to worry so much about, if you're in 1,000 different communities, you don't want to look at 1,000 different MOUs from each of those individual communities. So our proposal is that, or our proposition is that national employers develop their own 1 or 2 or 3 MOUs based on the templates that are out there, and they just offer these to communities to say, if you want us as an MOU or as a closed pod, you have to sign this MOU. It's our MOU because our legal department's not going to look at 1,000 different MOUs. So that's the type of thing. We also have developed a questionnaire that the county would give you all of the local rules and regulations that I talked about on the last slide. as well as there's a company sign-up form that we favor that indicates who is going to be participating from the company. So in other words, who gets notified from the company side if there is either an exercise or an activation, how many courses of medicine you need, what your pod location is in case they do offer up delivery, those types of things. So we believe it's everything that that a large company would need if they had multiple locations, that they'd be able to use these documents and create their own MOU and offer it up to people. And we think that's an effective way to solve a problem that national employers have, because generally speaking, they're not going to look at 1,000 different MOUs if they're, if they're in 1,000 different communities. So if you want to participate, and I'm just 1 or 2 slides away from being done, you want to contact, if you're a local employer or you have just a few locations or facilities around the country, you would want to contact the county's emergency preparedness manager. You want to get their MOU and whatever requirements they want to have. And if you're running into roadblocks at all, or if you need assistance, you can contact me, and I'm happy to help you just to make the connection. As a national employer, if you want to contact me, we've got a national employee template that we share. Again, there's no cost for us sharing the materials with you, and we can try and help you identify locations and talk about the national MOU that at least we believe is something that has merit. And that is my presentation. So I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has at this time.
Harlan, that was great. Thank you. I've got a whole bunch of questions. The only thing I'm going to preface it with, just to cover myself, is that while I'm getting the questions and cutting and pasting them onto a sheet so that I can ask them of you, some of them were answered. And in a couple of cases, the people actually withdrew their questions. So you covered so much material. I might have missed some of it, so I apologize in advance. You can just use it as an opportunity to expand on it, emphasize it, or just blow right by it. So let's just go right into them. From Wendy, who approves an organization becoming a pod?
That is the local county health department. So, and that's a little different. So in Dallas County, for example, it's actually the county executive board that approves each MOU specifically. In other communities, it can be approved by the emergency preparedness manager within the county health department. So you would definitely start with the county health department and go from there. And that's something that's probably individual to each community. So I don't know that there's one exact answer.
Okay, no, that's fine. This goes to cost still, and you talked about it. What's a typical cost per employee, or a typical cost of the program? Some of the costs would be on a per person basis, based on how many people you have to provide so many, courses of medicine, and then another part of it might be fixed costs. So, do you have any typical numbers that you might throw around?
Yeah, the typical number is 0. So let's talk about this. So there's no cost to join the program. There's no cost for the medication at all, ever. That's a guarantee. So what costs could there be? So first of all, there's time for planning. If you're a business continuity person, it's part of your job anyway, so I wouldn't consider that a cost to the program. So if you wanted to exercise, some of the exercises that I've seen that companies do, they provide lunch. So that's potentially a cost, or they provide breakfast, or if it's a morning meeting. If you're doing an exercise, so a lot of organizations already have tables and chairs and those kinds of things. If you wanted to buy vests for your volunteers who are going to be participating, you could, but that's certainly not a requirement. If you wanted to buy clipboards for people to fill out the forms that they're going to be filling out, because everybody, in order to get this medicine, you have to turn in a form that identifies if you've got allergies or other things. I mean, that's kind of getting too much into the weeds. But I would stand by, if you want to do it without any cost, you could do it without any cost, and the cost would be literally zero for this whole program from beginning to end, other than time for planning. You know, you need a little bit of time for planning.
Oh, no, good answer. Good point. That's great. Who's responsible for the training necessary for non-medical personnel to be distributing the meds in an emergency, or is it all pre-mixed and ready to just pass out?
It is already pre-mixed and ready to pass out, so it's in a pill bottle similar to what you would get from your pharmacist. And incidentally, there would be something called a standing order that would be, you know, when you get a prescription, you always have to get it with a prescription written by your doctor. In this instance, the county public health, the leading public health official generally is going to be issuing what's called a standing order, which basically is a prescription for everybody that's physically in their county. So whether they live in the county or not, the standing order applies to them, and if they show up at a pod, they're going to get medicine based on this standing order, which is like a massive prescription. But I would say, I'm sorry, Fred, repeat the question to make sure I get it.
It was overall, who is responsible for the training necessary for non-medical personnel to be distributing it?
So for training, so if you're in a state where anybody can dispense training, you can do just-in-time training and 10 to 15 minutes to be able to hand out this pill bottle. We recommend training in advance, and that'll always be handled by your local county health department. So they, in a lot of communities, they're offering this training to their current closed pods if they've been recruiting closed pods. But that's something that you deal with your local county health department on. We have done training for health departments if they want to hire us to do that. Again, that's all free to the company. There shouldn't be any charge for any training at all throughout this whole process.
Okay, very good. Who administers the medications? And I think the question here is that you're coming in off the street, you're being handed, a pill vial or whatever the form of the medicine is. Who's giving it to you? Is it a nurse, a doctor, just a layperson who's been trained? In the end, who's touching it?
Right. So that depends on state-by-state laws. So during a declared disaster where there's a public health emergency, some states waive the requirement that you have to have a license to dispense medicine in order to give out these pill bottles. So, and some states don't. So really it depends state by state. I had mentioned a couple of states, New York, Texas, and California are states that have it in the law to waive the requirement that someone has to have a license to dispense. So in those states, somebody can, with 10 minutes or 15 minutes of just-in-time training, they can potentially dispense the medicine. It's literally checking the form to see if you have allergies or if you're late-term pregnancy or if you're breastfeeding or if you're a child under 8 years old. Those are the types of things that determine which medicine you get. And so keep in mind, we're all under duress because there's anthrax in the air, something life-threatening. So they've decided to make it, in those states, they've decided to make it as easy as possible to make sure that we can dispense medicine to everybody in the community within 48 hours, which is a very daunting thing for a lot of communities. They just don't have the manpower sitting around waiting for something like this to happen. So if it would happen, they very quickly would have to ramp up, and that's why these partnerships with with large employers that would become closed pods are so important to the county health departments.
Okay, that's great. Have you worked with any Medical Reserve Corps? The person who's asking said he's presently on an MRC, and he said they're responsible for setting up pods in the event of a disaster.
Yes, and the Medical Reserve Corps is a great resource. In fact, I'm a member of the St. Louis County Medical Reserve Corps as well as the Dallas County Medical Reserve Corps. And they would help with the open pods, the open points of dispensing, but they generally won't help with the closed pods. But yes, MRC is, and for those of you that aren't aware of that, that's every county pretty much. They just recently passed 1,000 MRC units around the country. And so almost every community has a Medical Reserve Corps, which is made up of volunteers, medical and non-medical, that would help during disasters, public health disasters like what we're talking about now.
Great. How many days of medication are initially dispensed, and is there a follow-up program for additional medication?
Well, that's a great question. We don't usually get that question. Yes. There are, what you get in the pill bottle is 20 pills. You're supposed to take them twice a day, so every 12 hours. So it's 10 days worth of medication. And so what happens is if there's an anthrax threat that's determined in a community, they don't necessarily know exactly where it is and exactly who's been affected. They know it's in the air because a lot of communities have air sensors that will help them determine that there has been an anthrax threat. Otherwise, if there are no air sensors, it'll just be people showing up at hospitals with like symptoms that leads them to believe that there's a threat of anthrax or something like that. So in that instance, they want to make sure that they cover everyone. So the first thing they're going to do, because they don't know who's been affected, is that they will ask everyone to receive a 10-day course of the medication. But if you have been exposed to anthrax, it's actually a 60-day course of treatment. And so what they'll want to do is that getting everybody the 10-day course allows them a few days to figure out who was actually impacted, and those people that have a high degree or a high likelihood of being impacted would get the additional 50-day course at that time. So a lot of communities aren't really planning for the 50-day course yet. They're still planning for the 10-day course. But if you get the 10-day course, that gives them a few days to figure out who really needs the 50-day course.
Terrific. We've still got questions coming in, but not queued up just yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to queue them up and give them to Harlan. And when the email goes out from ACP to everybody who signed up, we'll include those responses from you, Harlan, if that works for you.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
so what we're going to do now is just going to be a little.
Let me interrupt one moment. That might take a few minutes for you to put together, Harlan, because we do have quite a few questions that have come in. Even in the last minute, we've gotten 4 more, and they're really good questions. So usually we would send the follow-up email out today. It might be tomorrow before that goes out, so I just wanted to let everybody know.
Okay, that's fine. And you know what? That's great, because the more questions there are, the more I know people are interested in this and really thinking about how they can apply it. So that's wonderful.
Great. Thanks, Fred. And Harlan, thank you for it was a great educational webinar. Great presentation. And I'd also like to thank ADG and their webinar experts that make this happen. And again, Continuity Housing, Fred, thank you for sponsoring the entire ACP webinar series. And remember to visit continuityhousing.com. Leave a comment in the survey if you're interested in how they can help you. Be sure to watch the ACP website for our next webinar information on future webinars. Excuse me. As a reminder, this and the previous webinars are recorded. They're made available on the ACP website. Feel free to share the link to the recordings with your peers and anyone who might benefit from it. You'll receive the link right after the webinar with an email with additional information and so forth that I've told you about already. And finally, a very brief survey about the webinar pops up when you close your browser. If you would please, I'm begging you, can't see this, but I'm on my knee, take half a minute to answer the questions. It really does help us refine these productions and get topics that are of interest. Harlan, thank you very much again. And everybody, please have a great day and be safe.